thoughtful ideas, suggestions for guests and topics.
Events, programs, and
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, we're here now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m. Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, in the top of the hour, let me thank you for your calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on HCC's TV Dialogue Houston. For after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show here on HCC TV, now probably in our 27th season. We always thank you for offering up ideas for topics and guests and subjects to be covered on upcoming segments of the show, because we really want this to be your community engagement, community civic show as we go forward every week. We have some great guests lined up as we complete 2020, and many of you have already emailed me that you'd be glad to see 2020 go, but we have some great guests coming up for 2021 also to begin to look at where do we go as a community, as a people, in this post-George Floyd reality, post-election reality, and moving forward. But today, we're going to start with something really home and local because I wanted to make sure we realize that the intensity of the focus of what's going on. And I couldn't think of anyone better to have on this week to talk about the kind of current realities of where we are than our good friend Howard Henderson, who is the director of the Texas Southern University Center for Justice Research, and as you know, was one of the wonderful members of the Mayor's Task Force on Policing Reform. So welcome, Howard.
Thank you for having me.
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing as best as I can be, and given all the givens, as the old people used to say in my family. Before we start, though, let me just stop and take a moment of silence here. I had to do this last week on the show for Sergeant Harold Preston, our neighbor, actually, because he lives in the community around Texas Southern University. And now we're having to do it again for Sergeant Sean Rios. And so let us just take a moment of pause and silence here in honor of Sergeant Harold Preston and Sergeant Sean Rios, if we could, please. So Howard, the system seems to be breaking down. We had 6 murders in one day, 6 murders in Houston in one day, from 6:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. What's happening?
You know, I think one, Houston's got to consider itself fortunate because it, from a statistical standpoint, it should be worse than it is. Given the population that Houston has, you would think that the homicide and murder rate would be much higher. It was keeping track with the other large cities around the country, but that's not the case, which means that there have been buffers in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. What has happened lately, though, is that you have seen what happens when the police are stretched thin, when resources are strapped, and those buffers aren't able to serve their purpose in society. Those institutions that we typically use to ensure people have a safety net, we're losing those. And I think you see now the impact of a reduction in federal support. And we are going to need to reintroduce that to Houston if we want to make sure that murder stays low and that people feel safe in the community.
In this era of great unemployment, educational issues in the urban area still being of crisis, in the middle of the pandemic that continues to go in the wrong direction, unfortunately, with concentrated pockets of poverty that seem to be even more prevalent today than they were even a year ago. We are in, as you said, the safety net, the wonderful safety net we've always talked about in society, which is both governmental, nonprofit, philanthropy, everything kind of combined. The safety net cannot keep up with the reality, as you just said, of where we are. So in this gap, and it is a gap in this in-between time, what are we to do?
Well, I think most importantly, we need to be able to listen to the experts, right? We've had a tendency to get away from that. We need to identify what the actual needs are in the community. But we got to figure out what are those agencies in the community that have helped us sustain a quality of life that's unsurpassed in this country. When you look at religious institutions, when you look at educational systems, or when you look at employment. But I think a bigger piece that we're overlooking is housing. Last I checked, the Housing Authority had about 26,000 people waiting for homes in the city of Houston. We're going to need to increase affordable housing. And we got to deal with that because that's a big issue. When individuals who are getting out of prison don't have a place to go, we understand what happens to them very quickly. And so affordable housing is an issue, but we can't forget COVID-19. You have a stress level that we've never seen before in the city. And God forbid we have a natural disaster, we're going to be in trouble. So I think that we need to focus on those institutions that allow us a safety net so that we can buffer our way through these trying times.
Well, one of the individuals, I think that were involved in one of the episodes last week, mentioned that he has to feed his family. And he said, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to feed my family. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to. People who are not even predisposed or prone to do things that they never would do under quote unquote normal situations, whatever that seems to be now, because the new normal is always shifting, I think are called in the heart of their own depths of despair and stress and anxiety to figure out some ways to survive. It is about survival in the end. And as you mentioned, we need almost every aspect, every arena. Childcare. I talk to single mothers all the time who still have a semblance or remnants of their job, but they can't go to their job because they don't have any childcare. So you name the list, and the list, if you started doing it the other day, the list just keeps growing and growing and growing. And yet, as we learned from the police task force, a lot of these issues falls on police and policing to take care of because society is just not able to do it or not willing to do it, to put the resources in.
So here's the way we see it. The police have a significant scope of work, right? And because we've taken resources away from social support mechanisms, you're now forcing the police to do jobs that they aren't trained to do, okay? I think that the whole push for increasing social work and policing is a great move. I think that we need to get back to understanding what police-community relations was really all about from the very beginning. I think there are measures in place that the mayor has put out and suggested and proposed, as well as the work from the task force, that if followed would really make a difference, because we're going to have to get back to good old-fashioned relationships, because we're going to need people to know each other. We're going to need people to be able to have, undocumented conversations about what's necessary and how we get this done. We're going to need people to know each other. We're going to need more national night outs. We need to make sure that at the end of the day, people know each other and that they can have the confidence that the next person will help them if they need it.
The series we were doing person to person before COVID through the Houston Public Library called Critical Conversations, and you were involved in one of those early on.
Right.
We need to continue those, develop those further now, even in the Zoom world. As you said, to get people together in that dialogue, because there's no substitute for dialogue, that helps build those relationships of mutual trust and respect, because nothing happens without trust. And therefore, in the old days, if you mentioned of community policing, thanks to Mayor and Chief Lee P. Brown, who brought it to Houston, there were beat cops. There was such a thing as a neighborhood beat cop. People knew their police officer. They knew the police officer on each shift. Many of those individuals had the phone number of the police officer, personal phone number on each shift. That was even before they all had cell phones.
Right.
So now, as you said, we need to get back to that. None of this stuff is brain surgery. It's not reinventing the wheel. We just need to get back to what we used to do in relationships with human beings, particularly who may be different than myself now, which is even a bigger challenge.
I think that, we're going to need common sense leadership, right? And we need people to understand that the good old fashioned relationships are old, or what we need to move our way through. Now we're so disconnected with social media. People don't know anyone. They comment without having a relationship with people. I think that we're going to have to figure out a way to try to decentralize some of this work. We're going to have to figure out what resources are available so that we don't duplicate efforts. But because the city is growing so fast, right, and we're losing that connection to one another, and we're going to have to somehow figure out how to get that back.
Well, I think those connections come from the things you and I have talked about, because you chair one of the wonderful, co-chair one of the wonderful committees on the task force again. And what we all saw in that as the follow-up that we need to do to help with implementation long-term is to develop those type of opportunities for people to get together. So I know one of the things you and I talked about, we haven't had a chance to get back to it yet, is to do some of those Zoom things in cooperation and partnership with you and TSU and your center and with others, and get them, let's get all together and do it and explain, as you said, not replicate, not duplicate, but explain the various components and elements of, let's say, the cog of the wheels that all have to be working simultaneously and working with each other to get where we're trying to go. Because I think a lot of this right now with COVID is kind of here and there, and everybody's kind of spread out, and resources are all limited. Resources, no nonprofit is bringing in what they were bringing in before COVID, even though they're trying hard with virtual galas, which is a challenge within itself. So there's a vacuum and a void again. And I think, as you said so well throughout the task force and before and beyond that, it is about those relationships. And we had them, or we were beginning to develop them at one time. I'm not going to say we fully had them, but now that has even taken some steps backwards. So what can we do going forward?
Well, I think one is we need to identify where the resources are best. There are people in the city that are doing good work. Make sure people know who they are. There are some organizations that need a little help to get to where they need to be. And then there's some organizations that we no longer need to support because they aren't working, they aren't effective, and we need to know who they are, because people in the communities are hungry for help. We need to make sure who needs jobs, right? We need to find jobs for people. We need to find adequate housing for people. But at the end of the day, we need to know exactly how to get to these resources in real time.
And I think part of that, getting to resources in real time that are active and engaged in doing something, really doing something for the citizens and taking action, brings to mind a discussion that was happening before COVID. We have too many nonprofits in this city. And at some point there was a conversation about merge and consolidation. Now I know I've said two dirty words, merge and consolidation, because no nonprofit wants to hear that. But before COVID, that was a reality, that was a discussion that even the foundations were having, who fund all of these nonprofits. That perhaps to do a better job, to serve more people, to be more efficient, effective in whom you're serving, to have greater and better outcomes, we may need to start looking at some of that. Because I think in how long will COVID go on and how long will the resources be diminished? We don't know. But I know if you're just struggling every day to survive, you're not able to help people thrive. Because remember, just thriving is not the goal. Flourishing, human flourishing is what we're talking about. So if you're just trying to help the organization survive every day, you're not even maybe able to help people to thrive. And so it's kind of like, okay, what are we doing here? And as you also said, the ones who we know are doing great work, who need our help, who need our support, who have the proof and the pudding every day of whom they're helping and how they're helping and changing lives, those we really need to get behind.
Given what you just said, I think you're spot on, and I would be remiss if I didn't, give you public acknowledgement for the great work you did leading the task force and bringing those personalities under one umbrella and being effective at producing a body of work I think that will stand the test of time. But at the end of the day, these are unprecedented times, right? When you look within the city and you try to understand where are the opportunities at, where are the threats to these opportunities located at, how does each neighborhood shape future economic and educational success? When you think about building a city that is going to contain the growth that's on its way, we have to understand that we need to use technology to our benefit. When you also think about having good old-fashioned conversations reveals insights into mechanisms that drive upward mobility, we can do that. I think we need to be strategic about that. I think we need to understand that from a policymaker and a practitioner standpoint, they can't be effective without communicating with the general public, but we need to be able to target those programs that focus on improving economic opportunity for the most disadvantaged in the city. And if we do that, I think we'll be effective.
And as we've talked many times, it is still and always has been and will be about equity. Plain and simple, it is about equity. And so you gave a great lead in. I'll just mention that right now at this juncture. For our next guest and the next segment of the show in Dialogue Houston, the very special HPO show we do, Living in New Knowledge. Our guest, Nicole Robinson, is going to be talking about the digital divide, exactly to your point, and what the HPL is doing to help the digital divide, to bring it together for everybody to have resources. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, I guess. When we talk about equity, people can talk about equality, and you don't get the reaction you get when you bring up the word equity. As soon as you say equity, and then if you attach the word necessary to achieve equity, social justice, then you get into this whole thing, as we learn through the criminal justice discussion, about how do we achieve and accomplish that in this era of being so divided, where one does not feel one is having something taken away from them to be able to help the other. Define the other again, someone different than myself, someone that does not look like me. But the other, as you mentioned so well a minute ago in Houston, is the majority of whom human beings we're talking about. In a city that now the minorities, as we used to call them and refer to them as the majority, in a majority minority city, this whole question about equity seems to be a different kind of conversation going forward.
I think we have to get back to the fundamental principles of what a democracy was all about. We have to understand what it means to create a more perfect union. We have to look beyond the individual. We have to look beyond political affiliation. We have to look beyond partisanship, because we need to be able to realize that the Constitution that we follow is designed to improve the quality of life and the constitutional protections for everyone equally across the board, regardless of your affiliation. The whole notion of we the people, I think, is supposed to be about all of us, understanding that we've been through our periods in history where we weren't all able to be respected. But I think over time, and particularly in this moment, we have been over-policed. We have been overrepresented in jails and prisons around the country. We have been disproportionately subjected to police brutality. In the wake of all of that, you have just experienced the largest number of Americans to go out and vote. So civic engagement, if measured by voting, is at an all-time high. So I think there's promise, there's resilience there, and hopefully we can use that as a springboard to ensure a greater level of protections for Americans who previously didn't see that at this level.
So those Americans who didn't experience it or see it at this level, who've been kind of the backbone and undergirding of this country, from slavery to now to racism, through Jim Crow to Reconstruction, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, civil rights, etc. We are at a point now, and you're at a perfectly poised university, Texas A&M University, historical Black university, on a campus where the education and educating children of color, people of color, is not an option. That's our future workforce.
Right.
Greater Houston Partnership says Houston has no future if we can't and don't educate the children of color. But yet to do that in a world where still the resources that may be needed to do it fully, robustly, as one needs to do it, still seems to be a challenge in achieving that goal.
More people now than ever before recognize that we are coming out of one of the most difficult challenges in the history of this country. We have seen widespread civil liberties be challenged. We've seen civil rights on the table for discussion, but the American people have been resilient in that. Attacks on immigrants, you've seen dog whistle approaches, you've seen white supremacists be supported in public. I think that we are now in a position where the civic engagement, it means something different now. I think that throughout this history, we have been tested. Our democratic values have had to stand up to the test of time. And I think we see we're living in a moment in which growth positively is going in the right direction. There's no way around it. I think that when you look at the history of Texas Southern University, you look at the role of the institution, which I have the privilege of working for, I think you understand its implication and necessariness in the city of Houston, in this country. When you think about the reason why the university was founded, because Black people were not allowed access into white institutions, and they've been able to take that reality and turn it into a very positive situation for the state in this country. Some of the greatest people in this country come out of the institution, but I think we need to be mindful that we will be challenged again, and we want to be resilient when the opportunity presents itself.
Well, resiliency is one of those key factors in moving this agenda forward. You said some things that really hit the shared common language in civic engagement that we've been talking about and trying to create. You know how that works, and we've talked about. If you change the narrative, you change the outcome, and so the narrative becomes very important to present the data, to be able to describe the conditions, speak to the outcomes, and do it with a shared common language. So you lead with shared common meaning and understanding to be able to take the next step, as you said, well, to move us from the I and me to the we and us. And that we and us has been the struggle of this nation from day one, which we still have not been able to achieve. As you said, we the people, no way have I red eye to people. But we the people has struggled and still is struggling to come into full flourishing of who and what that means in a republic, in a democracy, where so clearly from a civic engagement, we've always said and taught, there are 5 elements of what it means to be a citizen living in a democracy. I love to talk about 2 of those 5. Individual rights and privileges that go with being a citizen. That's the great I and me discussion. End of the day, right is all about me. I mean, say it's about yourself. What about the other 3 of the 5 tenets of what it means to be a citizen living in a democracy? What are our common duties, obligations, and responsibilities? To whom? The other. Define the other today in our society. Someone different from me, someone that doesn't look like me. But in that duties, obligation, and responsibilities is the we and us. So the civic lessons going forward, coupled with the reality of racial, social, economic justice going forward. And of course, the other 4th element, which we hate to talk about, but is the driver in many ways, and as it should or should not be, that's to be debated, the political reality. And by the way, we both know, as people who've dealt with this stuff all our lives, the definition of politics, it's not a dirty word. Politics means this: politics begins where consensus ends. Politics begins where consensus, if I can get consensus, agreement, compromise, before the issue bleeds into the political arena, I have a chance. But once it gets into the political arena, then everybody has to take a side, choose a side. And that's exactly what we see every single day. In this 50-50 split, 70 million, 74 million in this last voting, even though great numbers broke the numbers for turnout, it's still as a divided turnout. So Howard, as you have said so well in one of our closing task force meetings, to achieve this future, there are some steps we can start taking now. Because if we don't start taking those steps now, we have no shared collective future together going forward.
We are here to create a more perfect union. And I think with the work that we do at the Center for Justice Research, collaborating with organizations and entities around the city, the time is now to do that collectively and to go out and to reclaim the rights and privileges for all people, regardless of creed, sexual orientation, race, gender. I think we are in the right place at the right time. And there are going to be more issues that come up, and we need to be able to ensure that throughout those challenges, we're able to preserve individual rights and freedoms that many have died for and won. We'll need to make sure that we clear a pathway for all people, including those 11 million undocumented and stateless folks in the United States, without caveat. We have to go in the right direction. We will have to make sure that we align our way and our ideas to ensure that we're able to ensure racial alignment over time. And we, the people, will ensure that we do that because we have been resilient in the quest for equality and justice in this country.
Is the beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King spoke to, is the beloved community still a possible reality going forward?
I think so. And the reality of it is King provided one of the greatest examples of resilience. And I think he understood what community meant more so than many of us but we're still fighting, right? And we're still remaining steadfast and focused on ensuring that this country, that this city is able to achieve the promise of the Constitution. And we'll continue to fight it, no matter what we do, no matter who is in the White House, no matter who is in the governor's seat, no matter who is in the mayoral space. We will make sure that at the end of the day, we govern ourselves accordingly and fight for freedoms and rights of people who deserve those by right of being a human.
So 2021 is approaching us shortly. So let's put your crystal ball on and give me your top three issues that you think are very important for us to begin the new year really focused on, coming out of, as we just said, this middle passage, this in between time from actually November 4th to January 20th. What are those things that now it seems we have a chance as a people, as a nation, as a community, as Houstonians, to begin to focus on that will breathe some life into all these elements you and I have talked about in a short time? We've covered a lot of those areas. And
right.
What needs to begin to happen? What are those first 3 or 4 things that need to bubble up?
I'll take the challenge. I think one, we need to reduce inequities in public health. There's no way around that. We understand the role that has played in the ability of COVID-19 to decimate communities, Black and brown being the worst to receive that. I think criminal justice reform is inevitable. There's no way around it. I think it's low-hanging fruit. I think you have significant bipartisan efforts in that space. But I also think that you have civil liberties that people understand are natural to the American reality, that we need to go back and make sure that people achieve that. But at the end of the day, I think it's about making sure that we respect people just by them being human. And there's no other way around that.
Howard, I can't thank you enough for this wonderful time we spent together this afternoon on Dialogue Houston. We'll be doing more of this going forward. And what you and I talked about, we will get back to. You and I need to think about who this kind of panel discussion we need to have. And I want to get my critical conversation piece that I do with the Houston Public Library involved in that too, so we can get a broad outreach to a large audience. But this is the kind of dialogue we must continue, and we will continue going forward. So let me thank you again, and let me close with these couple of thoughts. What we have in front of us is the ability now to put the classic definition of adulthood to work. Adulthood means seizing the opportunity for creativity and initiative in the place of complaining about what cannot be done. And it behooves us to rise to the occasion, to seize the moment, and to make it happen. And those of us who come from a tradition that will understand the next line very well, it is from the old Negro spiritual. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. The response is, oh my Lord, what shall we do in answering the calling? It has always been about answering the calling, and it is today. In the model words of Benjamin E. Mays about reaching our stars and reaching our dreams, remember, for not failure, my friends, but low aim is sin. So let's aim high, aim high. 2021 is coming, but it's not going to be a better reality if we don't do our part and don't commit to making it a better reality. So until then, as always, we'll see you next week. Until then, as always, be safe, be well, peace, power, and love.